Hi, I'm Tom Doyle, Associate Professor of Justice and Interim Director of the Fox Rothschild Center for Law and Society here at Community College of Philadelphia. Welcome to our Perspective series on CCP TV, the educational channel of Community College of Philadelphia. In this episode, Adjunct Professor David Travaskis interviews Margie Gualtieri. Ms. Gualtieri, the Managing Attorney of the Support Center for Child Advocates, discusses her work in child advocacy championed by her program. Please enjoy what I'm sure you will find to be a very interesting and informative conversation.
Welcome to the Fox Rothschild Center for Law and Society's Perspective series on CCP TV, the educational channel of the Community College of Philadelphia. I'm David Travaskis, Adjunct Professor in the Paralegal Studies program. Today it is my pleasure to introduce our distinguished guest, the Managing Attorney of the Support Center for Child Advocates here in Philadelphia, Margie Gualtieri. Margie, it's great to have you with us.
Very nice to be here.
And Margie, why don't we start right at the beginning for the people who are watching. They may not know what the Support Center is. So what is the Support Center for Child Advocates?
We like to say that the Support Center for Child Advocates is the oldest pro bono services, pro bono legal and social work services for children in the nation. We represent in a multidisciplinary fashion children in abuse and neglect cases. Those cases can be either criminal prosecutions of the alleged abuser or civil dependency cases when the child's in foster care. We team an in-house social worker with a volunteer attorney from the community to represent children in court.
And that's what you mean by this interdisciplinary piece. It's a social worker and an attorney working with a kid.
It is, and we think that is so important in these cases because even though it's the legal problem, that is the abuse and the case that brings the referral to our office, unfortunately there are so many issues in the family other than the court hearing. Usually there's mental health problems, sometimes drug and alcohol. Most of the families we deal with are impoverished. Schooling is an issue for the children. So we really believe that the social workers bring such a unique and important perspective to the work that it's critical to team the social worker with a volunteer attorney.
And this is really a holistic approach then to solving the problems that are facing the child.
It is, and actually we talk about doing whole child representation. So even though we will get involved with a child, again, because of abuse and neglect, we look at every area of the child's life. We're looking at how they're doing in school. Do they need an individual education plan? We look at what's happening after school, recreationally. We really look at the whole child. Unfortunately, sometimes our child clients who are in their teens become parents themselves. So then we're looking at a whole other dimension of our child representation.
Can you give us just some examples of what would be the types of cases that you get? And how do children come to you?
The Public Defender's Office in Philadelphia, the Defender Association of Philadelphia, has a child advocacy unit. They do most of the representation of children in dependency cases. Again, I'm using dependency to talk about the court hearings for when children and families get involved with the child welfare system. In Philadelphia, it's the Department of Human Services. That's our children and youth agency.
So you're not dealing with the kids who are delinquent, the kids who have committed what would be as adult crimes generally?
Well, we don't represent children in delinquency court, but unfortunately, some of our children who are dependent children commit acts that cause them to be involved in the delinquency system. So we are still involved with them, and because sometimes we think that it's the dependency that underpins the Delinquency Act, but we don't represent them in delinquency.
Okay.
So the Defender Association does most of it, and we take some of their conflicts. So if they are already representing a parent, they cannot represent the child, and that's how we get involved.
Okay. If I'm correct, dependency is one of those areas that children all have the right to have a lawyer.
They do in Pennsylvania, and that's a great thing. Not all states in the United States give children that right to counsel, but Pennsylvania does in dependency proceedings.
Now, how many children in Philadelphia get involved in the system? Are we talking hundreds, thousands, and the whole system itself?
Well, we're talking thousands. We're talking court-involved youth. So there are thousands more who might be involved with the Department of Human Services whose families are getting services on a voluntary basis. But for court-involved youth, the numbers are going down, but I would wager that it's probably around 6,000 or 7,000 a year who are involved in court, dependent youth who are involved in court, children and youth. The Defender Association, I believe, represents probably 4,000 to 5,000 of those children. We represent 800 of those children, a lot less, and then private court-appointed lawyers represent the rest of those children.
Now, the model that you use, where you have this lawyer and the social worker, is that the model that everyone else gets?
No. The Defender Association does have a staff attorney and a staff social worker. We use a staff social worker with a volunteer attorney from the community. Most of the private lawyers, I would wager all of the private lawyers, do not have a social worker involved at all. So no. And I think it's not as good for the child because I really believe, as I said at the beginning, that the social work components are so important that that area can be missed if an individual attorney who's overworked generally has to do all of that.
And this idea that an attorney who is volunteering for you is then paired up with one of your social workers. So the social workers are on staff.
They are. Occasionally they're teamed up with one of the staff attorneys. We have probably about 25 people in our office now. I think we're up to, how many? So 10 or even 12 social workers now. We have 5 attorneys and some development staff and other administrative staff. But we team someone in-house with every volunteer. But the beauty of that is we get the best of the best volunteer lawyers from some of the biggest and best firms. We get private practitioners who devote their time. We get, stay-at-home moms who are lawyers who want to do this work. And they get usually just one case with us. Now, one case can be one child or a sibling group. Rarely do they get 2 or more and then they get to really focus on this child and advocate and represent the child to the best of their ability.
So it really does seem like a child who is lucky enough to get you really gets a special benefit.
Well, I think the Defender Association does a great job. I think the Child Advocacy does a great job. But yes, I do believe that our office is able to offer more time. Our volunteers go out and visit the children. They get intimately involved in their lives to help them in all areas of their lives under this whole child representation model.
Now, are there any stories you can tell us about kids that you guys have worked with, or even your volunteers who work with you, that might allow the audience to see really how this whole process works and the value of it?
One of the things I forgot to mention at the beginning is although most of our work is in child dependency, we often represent children in the criminal system as well, where they're the victim witness.
Oh, okay.
And so I was going to tell one of those stories, so I thought I'd give a little bit of background to that. So the child is abused or neglected by a family member. Unfortunately, it's usually a sexual abuse case by a stepfather or the mother's boyfriend. Now, as horrible as that case is, always, if the mother is protecting the child, the non-offending parent is protecting that child, that case is not a case that's going to come to us. We get involved in those cases where the mother is not supporting the child, or the mother says to the district attorney, this is all a lie. Nothing happened to my child. I'm not bringing her in for her prep. I'm not going through with the prosecution. So the concern by the court or the district attorney's office is that the non-offending parent is going to place this child back at risk.
And I know those kind of cases happen where actually the mother is sitting at the defense table, rubbing the back of the person who's been accused of offending against the child.
Yes.
So you are then representing the child there when there's no one else to help the child.
Right. Right, and so one of the cases where we were recently involved in did involve such a case where the mom just didn't believe the child, and so then the child starts to shut down, and the child, because even though as bad as it was before, when she is being abused, Now all of a sudden her mom is against her, and sometimes her siblings who were not abused are against her, and no one really believes her. And the defendant, who may be the breadwinner in the family, may be incarcerated. So now they're in danger of losing their home. And the child is under so much pressure to say, you know what, none of this happened. Because they just want it to go back to the way it was. As bad as it was, they want it to go back to the way it was. And so we're able to hopefully help support them through that process, help the parent too really see what's happening, and hopefully guide them and support them through the prosecution that we hope will occur in that situation to keep the child safe on a long-term basis.
Mm-hmm. That must be incredibly difficult, though, for the lawyer and the social worker dealing with the child there.
It is. I think our criminal cases are the hardest, and the subset of our criminal cases that I think are even harder are those cases where every now and then we get appointed in a delinquency case to represent a victim in the delinquency case. And so I believe that sibling-on-sibling violence are the most difficult cases that we get involved in, because then you can see that the parent of these two children, it's such a Sophie's choice, right? They want to protect their one child, but they don't want anything bad to happen to the other child who may have inflicted some sort of injury or even sexual abuse on their other child. And those are cases. And yes, these are very stressful cases for our staff, for our volunteers. I think the community is recognizing now, the court community is recognizing across the Commonwealth that there is vicarious trauma in doing this kind of work for the professionals who do the work.
Mm-hmm. Now, how did you, let's talk for a minute just about your own personal background. How did you come to be at the support center and get involved in this kind of work?
Okay. I went to law school late. I actually went to graduate school in social work about a couple of years after graduating from undergrad. I went to Temple, got an MSW, and worked for about 10 years as a social worker, which I really loved, but I always thought, well, maybe I would like to sort of combine some of what I'm doing. I always worked in dialysis or in hospitals. Mm-hmm. So I thought I might like to get into some sort of healthcare policy. Went to law school, got a degree, came out. Just so happened that I went into private practice in Media, Pennsylvania. My children were little. I had 3 children who were under the age of 8 when I graduated, and I didn't want to go to a big firm in Philadelphia, so I went to a smaller firm. But then, having a social work background, what I was doing, even though the work was challenging, I didn't feel like I was really doing socially conscious work at the time. Mm-hmm. Started to volunteer with the support center. So I was a volunteer attorney.
So you were one of the attorneys who's teamed with a social worker. I was.
And my social worker at the time was such a champion for me. She knew I really wanted to get a public interest job, so she would send me all these postings from around the Philadelphia legal community, which of course, as you know, is one of the greatest public interest communities, I think, in the United States, with 25 or 30 public interest shops. She would send me all their postings, and I landed at the support center 17 years ago now, and it was probably one of the better days of my life.
No, that's fantastic. Now, you represent 800 children a year.
Yes.
And you have a staff, has the attorneys, has the social workers, has the others support staff. How does that all funded? Are you a government agency?
We are not a government agency. We have minimal government contracts. We have to make probably 80 to 90% of our budget every year privately. So we make them primarily through private donations, grants, other foundation requests or proposals. We have a development team that does great work, obviously, because they keep us getting paid each week to be able to do the work. But it's very hard. We have 4 main events. We have an annual benefit reception, which is a lot of fun. It's in the spring of the year. I think it's usually in April or March of each year. At the Crystal Tea Room, and that brings in a lot of money for us. We have a run. The Bar Association has a run that we are the beneficiary of, and that's also in May of every year. In the fall, we have a golf classic, and then I believe around the holiday time we have an annual appeal. We also have a great, which we just finished. Every year we have a holiday gift and toy drive where we collect toys for not only the 800 children that we represent, but for every child who's living in the home with those 800 children. So thousands and thousands of gifts and toys. And the Philadelphia community, especially the bar and the law firms, so generous every year.
Now, if people wanted to find out about the Support Center, you guys have a website.
We have a website.
Do you have a Facebook? Are you on Twitter and all those things?
We are now. I'm a little old for those things, so I can't speak about them specifically. Our website is www.advokid.org. We do have a Facebook page. I believe we're on Twitter now. We recently, in the last 6 to 8 months, actually hired someone designated to keep that updated. We have an electronic newsletter that goes out, and there should be a link to that on our website. So yes, please like us on Facebook.
Now, one of the things that I'm sure, though, people watching this might wonder how they could get a kid they know who's in need to get your services. It sounds like you're really providing a Cadillac of services for young people in trouble. But you're saying that these referrals have to come through the public defender's office? Somebody can't call you privately?
Well, actually, the referral doesn't come from the public defender's office. So the court initially will appoint the public defender's office for a child. The defender will notify the court that they can't take it for some reason. There's a conflict.
In a case where we have, say, an abuse by a parent against a child, the public defender may have already been representing the parent.
Correct.
So the child is now in the court system. They want to appoint the Philadelphia public defender, and the Philadelphia public defender can't do both sides. So they say, we have a conflict.
Yes.
All right.
So now the court may call us. The court may also call a court-appointed attorney, somebody from the private list of attorneys who have been trained in dependency work, because there is a training that all attorneys have to go through before they can get on that list. So they call us, generally the court calls us in more complicated cases, in multi-sibling cases where the abuse is a bit more severe. But given our size, we probably take about 2 to 4 referrals a week. Mm-hmm. So we couldn't take all of the referrals from the court anyway. So sometimes they call us, sometimes they call a court-appointed attorney. And if we decline, they definitely call a court-appointed attorney.
But you're getting the cases that they think this combination of social work and attorney can really help with.
I do believe they do that screening. Yes. Mm-hmm. I mean, yes, I do. They look for some of the more complicated cases for us.
Now, you talked about volunteer attorneys, and you said you were yourself a volunteer attorney. How does an attorney who wanted to get involved with this get to be a volunteer of the Support Center?
Well, first of all, they should call me, 267-546-9221, or Jody Schatz.
Say that again slowly.
267-546-9221 is my direct dial line. Jody Schatz is our director of pro bono and training. She actually is the one who plans our trainings. We usually do 2 trainings a year for attorneys who wish to volunteer with us. It's open to any attorney in the community. Our next one is in April. It's usually April and October. We've been contemplating adding a 3rd one, and that may come in the future. That consists of a full day at PBI, a full day training, and we have people tell us it's a great training because it's really not. We have lawyers and social workers, sometimes psychologists, judges, lots of people who are presenting that day. After the training, you're also required at this point in time to do a 2-hour courtroom observation, which we will schedule with you, which Jody schedules right after the training. At that point, you are trained. Our office does require criminal clearances and criminal background check. I'm sorry, child abuse clearances.
Right.
Criminal background checks.
Because you're going to be working
FBI
with children,
clearances.
so you have to have all those clearances.
Yes. So once all of those steps are completed, we will have a case for them.
Wow. It does seem like that you're asking the attorneys to jump through a lot of hoops, though. They don't just show up and say they want to help. So how many attorneys are helping you?
Oh, at any given time, we probably have 300 active volunteers, but over the course of our existence, and we just last year celebrated our 35th year, this year will be our 36th, we've trained thousands and thousands, probably 10,000 attorneys. Mm-hmm. And individual attorneys They come to us, they take a case. Sometimes they always just volunteer with us. Sometimes they leave us to go volunteer with another organization in Philadelphia, which is great. As long as they're volunteering, we just support that. They come back to us. So it's nice to have a whole pool of trained volunteers.
And a mixture of young and old
Yes.
attorneys. Now, can other professionals, if I was a social worker, could I call you up and say I'd like to work with you and volunteer as a social worker? Are there opportunities for other people? We have paralegal students here at Community College of Philadelphia. Is there an opportunity for them to get involved with you?
We don't really have opportunities for a social worker to volunteer with us, although we have had opportunities for paralegals, but in order for their experience to really be meaningful and we think enjoyable, we often think that a paralegal, if they're at a law firm, should be teamed with a volunteer already who's working on a case so that they can actually work on an individual case. Because the kinds of work that we can give to a paralegal is generally more administrative, a case log or putting, file work, not much individual client related. Not so much for social workers, unfortunately, although we do have opportunities for social workers and anyone who want to participate in our holiday toy drive, and so many different roles. We have people from all over the community who come and help, not only to, first of all, to donate gifts, second, to help us sort those gifts, because we sort them and bag them and then deliver them all. So there's a lot of opportunities from November till the Saturday before the holiday, before the Christmas holiday, for individuals who are not attorneys to be able to help. We have some at the annual benefit reception, which is in the spring. Sometimes our development team takes volunteers. At different times during the year, we do have administrative tasks.
Well, I want to now take you back and let's look at a child. So
Okay.
a child gets involved, and is there an average age at which you're seeing these kids? I mean, it can happen any time in their lives.
It really can happen any time
So
in
what are
their
the
lives.
youngest kids that you've been involved with?
Oh, newborns.
Oh, really? Newborns? You would get a
Newborns.
case with a newborn?
Yes, and usually the newborn is referred because the child tests positive for drugs at birth. And so, at 3 days or 4 days at the time of discharge, the hospital is calling the Department of Human Services, or the mother leaves the child in the hospital, and we could get called in those cases. So yes, straight from birth. Unfortunately and tragically, we have severe, extensive physical injuries to babies and infants. Those are cases that we take. Severe physical abuse, child who has multiple broken, or child who mother takes to the emergency room saying that the child's not breathing, and when the doctors in the emergency room are checking out the child, they do an x-ray and they find multiple healing rib fractures or other awful injuries. But all through, we school-age children, we get referrals because of neglect. Cases come in because of neglect. A teacher has called the Department of Human Services because a child is constantly coming to school either, smelling badly, hungry, left there because no parent picks them up after school, to teenagers. And we actually have a staff attorney who specializes in working with older youth, and she is just terrific.
Now, what is the upper limits of age that you'll work with it? Is it when a child hits 18 or is it?
21.
It's 21.
It's 21.
And can you explain to the audience that difference? Because children are allowed to take themselves out of the system at 18.
They are. But last July, and we think this was a great, I'm not sure what the word is, but a great improvement in the law. Last July, prior to last July, if a child took themselves out of the system, they couldn't get back in the system. And what we were seeing was children who were just, I want to get out of here, I just want out, I don't want all these people in my life. But they really didn't have a plan, they really didn't have a place to live, and so they ended up, couch surfing from friend to friend until 6 months later they realized that this was awful. And a lot of those children, unfortunately, were ending up homeless and really on the streets. Last July, the legislature passed some changes to the Juvenile Act, which now allows a child to come back into the system, to file a motion for resumption of jurisdiction if certain parameters are being met, certain elements are being met. They do have to either be in school, they have to or in a vocational program, or a program that, or working 20 hours a week, or if their mental health issues are so severe that it precludes any of those, if they can show that. So if they leave up till 3 months prior to their 18th birthday, or they leave after their 18th birthday, they can come back in. And we think that's a great improvement. They can, but up to 21.
Right.
21, unfortunately, they're out of the system.
But so you actually have some young people you work with all the way till they're 21.
We do. We encourage our clients when they reach 18 to stay in the system. They're giving up entitlements. They're giving, if they leave the system, they believe they're gaining freedom, and of course they are at some level, but they're giving up the right to room and board by the Department of Human Services, often a right to continue their education in a lot of ways. We encourage them to stay in. A lot of our clients didn't accept our advice, and that's why we are appreciative now that we can get them back in. And we already are seeing clients come back and say, I want to go back in. I recognize that was a good thing for me.
And actually, isn't there an incentive to get the kids out of the system at 18? Isn't there a personal incentive? They can get some sort of cash benefit if they leave, a small one that some children have taken or not. Is that?
I don't know of one, but that doesn't mean one doesn't exist. I just have never heard of one.
No, that's something that I've heard from other advocates, that there is a small cash incentive. So an 18-year-old thinking about freedom and some cash in hand would go through. But it's neat to know the law has changed. Advocacy is actually part of the Support Center for Child Advocates as well, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And when you are getting a chance to look at the system, and everyone talks about we need to do more for our children. Obviously, the court system, the judges will tell you they're underfunded. Our children and youth will tell you they certainly could use better resources. What I wonder about is, with a program like yours, why aren't you taking more kids? Why aren't you getting bigger?
We have gotten bigger. When I first started back in 1996, I think we had 2 lawyers. We had Frank Cervone, our executive director, as you know, a lawyer, extraordinary person. And he's been with us for a very long time. So he was there as a lawyer, but he was the executive director, so more an administrative position. We had a managing attorney at that time and maybe 2 other lawyers.
And that's when you joined?
Right, and maybe 5 social workers. And as I said, now we're up to about 12 social workers, 5 attorneys. So we are growing. And each year, because of that growth, we've been able to increase our caseload. But also recently, we've made a conscious effort to decrease our caseload, because we recognize that we're trying to deliver such an optimum service that to give our social workers 75 cases a year was just too much to have them involved in every aspect of the child's life. We're down to around 60 cases right now for each of our social workers.
The thing that always comes up when people talk about kids who have been helped by the Support Center is we wish we could help every kid that way. And there is always that question of fairness. The child who was in conflict because with the Defenders Association ends up with the private practice attorney who may be a wonderful attorney but doesn't have the social work support and doesn't have the support that you can provide. Because as you mentioned that your attorneys, staff attorneys, are paired up with the volunteer attorneys. So if I was a volunteer attorney and I came up with a circumstance I just didn't know what to do, I have somebody to call.
You do.
And I don't know that that's always there for the private practice attorney. They can call a peer, they can look, they can research it and do things. But it just seems you have such institutional expertise now with 36 years of doing this.
I think we do.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank my guest, Margie Gualtieri, for joining us today from the Support Center for Child Advocates here in Philadelphia. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in. You've been watching the Fox Rothschild Center for Law and Society's Perspective series on CCP TV, the educational channel of Community College of Philadelphia. I'm David Trevaskis, an adjunct professor here in the Paralegal Studies program. For more information, please contact us at the college, and we'll see you next time on Perspectives.